Eric Cola and his friend Mike Gens are rubbing grouts into the shower walls of Mike's girlfriend's place in La Crosse, Wisconsin, in the afternoon of Friday, the 21st of May, 2010. Mike had asked 40-year-old handyman Eric for assistance on the tiling project earlier that day, but was sensitive to the fact that it was Eric's wedding anniversary. Eric, who was very close with Mike, brushed off his concern and said he could work on the project and then take his wife to a restaurant in Galesville. The next day, Eric was hosting one of his regular barbecue parties at his house where friends and family attended. Of immediate concern to Eric was him burning the shrimp scampi they were about to eat, and maybe less concern was afforded to the fact that after several phone calls, he couldn't reach his parents, Dennis and Myrna. This wasn't too much of a problem because, for one, it was graduation season and Myrna was a teacher who was normally invited to these events. And for two, Dennis and Myrna frequently took trips on weekends, despite being regular attendees at their son's barbecue parties. A day later, as was tradition on Sunday, Eric went golfing with his buddies at Black River Falls. Later that afternoon, Eric went over to Mike's boathouse at the Westside Boat Club to help dig a fire pit. The next day, Monday, as Eric is preparing for a morning of day trading, he receives a call from the West Salem School District asking if his mother had gone on a trip, because she did not show up for work. If there wasn't much concern in the preceding days, then there was definitely a concern now. Eric tries calling Myrna's cell phone at 8:21 a.m., but there's no answer. He then immediately calls his dad's cell, but nothing. 8 minutes later at 8:30, he calls their landline and leaves a voicemail. He drops what he's doing, tells his wife he's going to check up on them, and drives over to their home, steps through the open garage door and into the home. Moments later, he makes this call.
911, what is the address to David?
And I'm at my mom and dad's house.
Okay, what's our address?
It's
I can't understand you.
and 3071.
And 3071.
Fox Hollow.
Okay. And okay, what's going on?
I was called this morning because my mom didn't come to work.
Okay.
And been answering her phone this weekend. So I came out to check on her. I don't know. I'm just bothering me.
Okay, your dad is what?
He's on the floor.
Okay. Is your mother there also?
Mom.
So is your father Ma'am, I need to get further information. Can you just kind of calm down just a little bit? I'm sorry for what you're finding, but is your father alive? He is not. Is your mother there with you also? Okay, let me verify the address with you. Is it N3071 Fox Hollow Drive, correct?
Yes, correct.
Is there anyone else with you, ma'am?
No.
Okay.
This is their son.
Okay, are there weapons laying there?
No, I can't see anything.
No?
No, I can see.
Okay. Is he lying in the kitchen?
My dad is in the kitchen.
Your dad is in the kitchen? Where's your mom?
My mom is by the computer.
Okay.
The room.
Is your mom breathing?
No.
Okay, and your dad is not breathing?
No.
Okay, all right. All right. Can you just step out of the house until I get an officer there? Okay.
Eric had been outside of his parents' home in a state of hysteria when police arrived on this day, the 24th of May. He identified himself as the son and told them he tried tugging on his father's leg, but he was stiff. He also said he tried shaking his mother, but she was unresponsive. Police noticed the mail at the residence was not collected and the newspapers not picked up. In the video taken by investigators, Dennis can be seen from the garage door laying face down in the dining area of the kitchen, eyes closed and blackened. He was wearing a jacket and dress pants, with his car keys in one hand and a water bottle in the other. There was an enormous amount of dried blood around his head that looked like black tar. Myrna was at her computer desk in the office when she was killed. Her arms hung between her legs as the right side of her head rested on the desk next to her keyboard, her glasses lowered to her mouth area. There was also a large amount of blood on the desk and on the carpet under her chair. The window shades were pulled, presumably so no one could peer through from the outside. Upstairs on the second level, in the 2 spare bedrooms, investigators observed drawers pulled out, but no items appear to have been removed or thrown about. In the master bedroom, a similar scene of pulled drawers can be seen with items of value still present. Furthermore, Dennis still had on him his wallet with credit cards and cash and a money clip. Myrna's purse with cash and credit cards was on the table in the dining area. The home still had its flat-screen TVs, computers, cameras, and other valuables. It looked like a burglary, but only superficially so. Dennis and Myrna were each killed with a single .22 caliber bullet to the brain, according to an autopsy. 2 perfect shots in the middle of their brains, causing immense damage and quick deaths, was the verdict. Investigators found Dennis's .22 caliber long rifle and boxes with missing .22 round ammunition in the upstairs bedroom where Dennis slept. Eric recalled to police on the scene that he had spent the morning trading and that his stocks and commodities were doing very well. Then he got the call from the school district about Myrna. 68-year-old Dennis had been in the Navy before building up a Ford car dealership called Valley View Ford. After the dealership was sold, he settled on the 8 to 5, Monday through Friday grind as a pharmacist at the Ho-Chunk Nation in Black River Falls starting in 2006. His daughter Cindy said he was a fountain of medical knowledge who, for example, would advise her on how much of a painkiller her daughter should take. He coached her in soccer, softball, and football. He loved golf and disco music and had a special place in his heart for the Bee Gees musical group. 65-year-old Myrna was a substitute teacher in West Salem. Cindy said she had great knowledge of the birds and flowers in the tri-state area and loved crosswords and gardens. She said Myrna had the voice of an angel who sang lullabies to her daughter and belted out tunes when she cooked, including 50s rock and roll and Ricky Nelson. Dennis and Myrna would often get into playful fights with each other over whose music they were going to play, Cindy said. The point being they loved being in each other's company. They had a garden and did work on it together. They had many bird feeders because they loved watching the birds. While Myrna loved her Christmases, Dennis didn't care too much about it because, Cindy would say, he grew up not having much for Christmas. This might have informed Dennis's motivation to be extremely hardworking, doing the daily slog well into his traditional retirement years. So was Myrna, who once told Cindy when her daughter complained about things that life is not fair, it is what you make of it. They were happy people, their daughter Cindy recalled, and enjoyed traveling and being with friends. Right to the last hours of their lives, their love for their family members can be seen. Just shy of 2 hours before she was murdered, Myrna had purchased at 3:53 p.m. a gift card to TGI Fridays and a balloon for Eric's wedding anniversary. She then went over and handed the card and balloon to Eric's wife, Christine. Investigators determined that she was first to get home that day, plopped her purse on the table, took off her coat, and at some point got on her computer. She had been in the middle of a Google search that began with the word plan and ended with Q and W, which investigators were able to determine were the last 2 keys she hit on her keyboard when she was shot from behind. Forensics were able to determine that the keyboard keys were hit at 5:41 p.m. on Friday, May 21, which they concluded was her time of death. Investigators determined that the killer then waited for Dennis to come home, and when he did, he was shot immediately after entering from the garage at around 6 p.m. A single bullet to the right side of his head, just above the ear. Investigators had a date and rough time of death, seeing Myrna's final keystrokes and the fact Dennis left work at 4:59 p.m. and had about 58 minutes to travel back home. But there was a huge problem they were about to be saddled with. No evidence. No fingerprints, no footprints, no hair, no bullet casings, no weapon, and no DNA in sufficient quantities to be tested. What's more, no witnesses. The road to justice appeared to be one that was going to be tread on circumstances alone. Eric explained that the last time he had seen his mother and father together was on May 12th, or Mother's Day, and the last time he had seen his mother was earlier that week when he helped her fold laundry. He said he last saw his dad at 4 p.m. on the day before the murders. Eric had been heading to a regular golf outing as a member of the local Fox Hollow Club when he stopped by to have a chat with Dennis, who was installing some new deck boards. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before he left for the course for some rounds at 4:20 p.m., he said. The next day, Eric, who was self-employed as a day trader, said he got up at around 6:45 that Friday morning and turned on the TV and watched as CNBC reported how poorly the markets were doing. He made himself some coffee and waited for the markets to open so he could start trading securities at 8:30 a.m. He said he then called his father around noon to discuss how the stock market was doing. Eric and Dennis were described as very close, like best friends, so this was a normal interaction for them. After the call, he said he left from Mike's girlfriend's place at around 2:30 p.m. to do the tiling work we discussed at the top. Because the home had the water turned off, Mike and Eric both said they used a neighbor's water hose to try to wash as much sandy grout off their hands as possible, but still left with some on them. Eric said he then left the Loomis Street residence at 5:30 p.m. on that Friday, called his wife Christine to tell her he needed to get an anniversary present, and hurried to get a plant for his wife at the Shopko in Bridgeview Plaza on Rose Street. But he said he couldn't find a plant he liked there, so he went over to the Shopko by Valley View Mall and bought a hanging plant there and drove home. He provided investigators with a receipt stamped with the time of 6:15 p.m. When he got home, he said he showered and then took his wife to the Wassons Supper Club at about 7:20 to 7:30 p.m. While there, he got a call from his friend inviting him over for champagne as a toast to celebrate their anniversary. After leaving the restaurant, they stopped by the friend's house and then returned home at about 10 to 10:30 p.m. The next day, Saturday, Eric said he got up and started doing some yard work. He said he called his parents to thank them for the TGI Fridays gift card, but didn't get a response. He tried again later to invite them over to that barbecue, but still didn't hear anything. He didn't leave a message, presumably because he wasn't too concerned given their habits. Eric loved to golf, so he had a routine where on Sunday mornings at around 7 a.m. he got picked up by his friends to do some rounds at the Black River Falls golf course. After they were done that May 23rd day, Eric said he was dropped off at 1 p.m. before getting a call from his buddy Mike to come over to his boathouse to help him with the fire pit. He then said he got home between 5 and 5:30 p.m. when he was told by his daughter Hadley that she was unsuccessful in reaching his parents. Going off of the burglary theory, investigators asked Eric if his parents had money trouble, but he said no. Asked if they kept large amounts of cash in the home, he said his dad had about 20 to 30 gold coins that were kept in a brown hinged box with about $1,000 to $2,000 stuffed in a sock inside a drawer. Going on that tip, investigators searched the residence but couldn't find any gold coins, so they canvassed local coin and pawn shops on the theory that maybe the thief sold them. But they came up with nothing. When asked about anything else he could tell them, Eric recalled Myrna saying that she got into an argument with a scruffy-looking guy while she was working in the yard. He said Myrna told him the guy looked like he'd been scoping out the neighborhood. At some point, Eric's 16-year-old son Dexter was questioned about whether he drove up to his grandparents' home often, if he took his friends there with him, and if he had any friends that used drugs that might have wanted to hurt his grandparents, but nothing came of it. Then investigators would get a call later that month. Stephen Burgess had been on edge for some time. The president and CEO of State Bank, who also happened to be neighbors with Myrna and Dennis, called sheriffs on May 28th, 7 days after the murders, and provided them with a shocking theory: that whoever killed the couple made a mistake. He told Sheriff Helgeson that he'd been getting some unnerving voice messages since April 28th. And they went something like this. Your time is limited. Your days are numbered. You'll be reduced to ashes. And on the eve of the murders, you're toast. On the day he started receiving these messages, he reported them to his bank's security officer and then didn't say a word about them until after the homicides on his street. As for the possible reasons for the threat, Stevens said that while his bank hadn't done any foreclosures on homes at the time, there were some instances of conflict with patrons. What's more, Stevens' wife drove a pearl white SUV, which was very similar to the vehicle Myrna drove. Now investigators had to chase the very real possibility that this could have been a case of mistaken identity. And they were about to get some tips on their way to building that theory. Paul Bagstad was traveling from a round of golf to start work as a cook at Sills Restaurant and Bar that Tuesday, May 18 day when he noticed something unusual in the restaurant's parking lot. At 3:30 p.m., he saw a silver car he'd never seen before and a man with a beard at its rear smoking a cigarette. The man was leaning against the rear tailgate facing toward Fox Hollow as if he was scoping it out. Paul's boss and restaurant owner, Linda Reedy, said she saw the man come in and, with hood over his head, made a beeline to the bathroom, where he would spend the next hour. At no point did he speak with anyone, order food, or ask for a drink of water. Both Paul and Linda thought he might have been involved in drugs. The man was so suspicious looking, they tried to get his license plate, but couldn't as he drove away. Investigators barely had time to process Stevens' tip when on the same day they got an urgent call. It was from Eric, and he needed them to get to his house quickly. Good friend Mike had spent the night before at Eric's place, where they lounged in his basement bar drinking. Mike said Eric was emotional and upset, both about his parents' deaths and about how the police spent so much time interviewing his son. Both woke up feeling terrible, and so they went down to the McDonald's and then to Mike's boathouse. But before they could do much, investigators called Mike for an interview, so Mike drove Eric back home at around 11 a.m. Later that afternoon, Eric called police. When police pulled up at 4:30 p.m., Eric was seated at the end of his driveway. He appeared emotional and upset, but investigators said he didn't look intoxicated. He told them he had been cleaning the yard and working around the house when, at some point, he received the mail directly from the mailman. Inside was an envelope with a note that had just 2 words on it: "Fixed you." While he appeared stressed, investigators said Eric did not ask for more police presence at his home. That night, police installed a security camera on a light pole pointed to Eric's home to see if they could catch any suspicious people. They kept Eric ignorant of it because they wanted to keep their suspect list open. Putting together the death threats to Stephen, reports of the mysterious man surveilling Fox Hollow, and now this note, and perhaps the inescapable thought that the crime scene was too clean, investigators were looking at the very real possibility that this could have been the work of a hitman. But why Myrna and Dennis? The answer to that question at the time was simple. They weren't the targets, and the supporting premise went something like this. If a hitman wanted to navigate to a home they weren't familiar with, they would probably use some kind of GPS software. When investigators searched Stephen Burgess's address in Google Earth, the navigation software pointed to the residence at N3071 Fox Hollow Drive, which was Myrna's and Dennis's residence. A couple of weeks after the homicides, Eric and a friend went to a benefit golf outing. The friend's wife said that Eric really didn't want to go, as he was likely still reeling from his parents' deaths, but they had already paid and planned to go for months in advance, so they went. Besides, it might cheer Eric up a bit. Meanwhile, investigators were still doing interviews with people who knew the victims, still clinging to the possibility that they can bring someone to justice, even though the odds appeared stacked against them if this was indeed a professional hit. Over 90 items were collected from the crime scene for examination. far more than was in the immediate aftermath of the murders. In fact, there was only one thing that investigators identified as missing from the home: a single blank check. In casual conversation with police on that cursed May 24 day, Eric told them that he was trading all morning and that he was bringing in between $7,000 and $10,000 a month doing what he did. He said he estimated that he brought in about $40,000 so far in that year. It was a job with great perks. He got to hit it big by making a lot of money in a short period of time, all the while getting to see his stay-at-home wife whenever, though some may dispute how healthy that actually is, and could take care of the kids on a whim, another disputable so-called benefit. Eric started his working career attached to his father's hip around the mid-90s. The father-son duo had intended to buy a bowling alley in Neilsville, which would make sense considering Eric was a great bowler. Instead, they went into the car dealership business. Eric was a car salesman at the Valley View Ford dealership to start, but his father had an inherent trust in his son to one day take over the family business. So Eric was thrown into all different areas of the company: parts, service, and the back office where he dealt with finances. He worked his way up to president before the business was sold. From the sale came a windfall that was deposited into an account called a VVFRE, which was controlled by Dennis. At some point, however, the company managing the account declared bankruptcy, so the Colas were trying to salvage as much of it as they could. Eric gave various numbers as to what was left in the account after the settlement, with the highest number being about $339,000 and the lowest being around $100,000. He said Dennis intended for him to inherit about $1 million when all was said and done. So the money faucet opened, starting with a $500,000 gift in 2007 that he immediately put into his Fidelity investment account. In 2008, he had almost $800,000 in the account. With the influx of cash, he decided to capitalize and invested aggressively in the trading of stocks and options. Basically, those are securities contracts that lock in the current price of a product or good against future price increases. So, on October 31st, 2008, Eric opened a trading account on the platform called Options Express. Investigators were still going through the process of eliminating suspects, including the victim's children. Investigator Leinfelder had gone over to the Shopko store in Bridgeview Plaza, the first Shopko Eric said he had gone to simply get Eric on surveillance film and check out his alibi. Recall that this Shopko was the one Eric said he went to first to get the anniversary plant, but he said because he couldn't find one at that location, he went to the other Shopko in Owen, Alaska, from which he produced a receipt at 6:15 p.m. Investigator Leinfelder asked the Shopko in Bridgeview Plaza to review the surveillance footage between the times he would have been there, so roughly between 5:30 and 6-ish p.m. All the investigator needed was to capture Eric's tan Ford F-150 Lariat in the parking lot or him walking somewhere to cross him off the list and be on his merry way. Multiple angles and pans of the footage later, and nothing. Eric wasn't on tape. Meanwhile, Marshall Reed of the Wisconsin State Crime Lab was one day inspecting the envelope which housed the threatening "fixed you" letter that Eric said he received from the mailman. The lab noticed that the envelope had a distinct printing defect in it. Eric had by then voluntarily handed over his home's computers, Xbox, his sandals, and his gun. When investigators went into his basement, they searched a roll-top desk for more evidence. Inside the middle drawer and underneath some other papers were envelopes with the same defect. James Marcos knew the Colas very well. He went to college with the victims and stayed connected with them up until their deaths. James and his wife and 3 other couples, including Dennis and Myrna, had a ritual where they would go to Madison to watch a band concert. A month before the murders, on April 15, the 4 couples went out to one of those concerts and then headed to a restaurant called Choo Choo's. It was in the parking lot of the restaurant where Dennis and James started talking about life and how their families were doing. James said he knew Eric was a day trader but didn't know what his daughter's husband Patrick did. Dennis shook his head and told James that he was disappointed with the guy because his daughter Cindy was working 2 jobs and carrying the load of that family while the bastard sat around the house doing nothing. James said it was very unusual for Dennis to call anyone by that kind of name. He just had a poor work ethic, Douglas Beaver, who was Dennis's boss at the pharmacy, recalled Dennis saying of Patrick about 2 or 3 weeks before his murder. He wasn't providing income for his family, but was running up their credit cards, he would complain. Dennis was asking Douglas for advice about the situation. He was concerned about his daughter's financial well-being and his own ability to continue to fork over money to her so they could keep their heads above water. Douglas simply told Dennis to express some tough love for once, cut them off financially because he felt Dennis was enabling Patrick's behavior. Investigators were able to corroborate those concerns with Dennis's work colleague Tina, who told him that on the morning of May 21st, she listened to him rag about a phone conversation he had with his daughter that included the tidbit that Patrick had just lost his job. Cindy was said to be upset about having to keep asking her father for money because Patrick was lazy and felt like he was taking advantage of her parents. A witness also said Cindy was upset with the way Patrick treated her. It seemed like with every hour his son-in-law was unemployed meant another hour that he had to delay his own retirement. 2 days before his murder, Dennis and his brother Leroy went out golfing. It was a time to unwind, contemplate, and confide with a close friend or relative about some closely guarded secrets. As they were driving around in the golf cart, not talking about anything particular, Dennis blurted out, "I'm all done giving to the kids." Leroy said the comment surprised him, but he didn't probe the issue because he knew that if Dennis wanted to elaborate, he would. That's just who he was. The elderly couple had been maxing out their grandchildren's education funds, spending at least $9,000 on the offspring of their kids. Dennis and Myrna were generous to a fault. That much was well known. Perhaps what was less known, including to Cindy, was how much more Eric was drawing from the family coffers. And even less, what was actually happening with the money. Investigator Leinfelder had been reviewing Eric's cell phone records on the day his parents were murdered when he stumbled upon a line item that stuck out like an elephant twirling a hula hoop. It was a call at 12:08 p.m. to a stock trading platform called Options Express. The investigator learned that the company records their phone calls, so he listened to a recording of that particular one. On it, Eric was informed by a member of the team that he had an overdraft fee and that he only had $12.39 in his account, which wasn't enough to cover a check he had written. With each new revelation, investigators were watching the slow falling of a house of cards. By the tail end of December 2008, Eric had taken massive money losses as the global financial crisis wiped out investments and retirement accounts. 2 months earlier, on October 31 of that year, Eric opened that securities trading account on Options Express and deposited $47,453 to start his day trading business. By the end of the year, he was down to a measly $417. Recall that he had that $500,000 gift from his dad in 2007. He put that money in his Fidelity investment account. By April 2010, that amount was down to $158. In those 2 years, 2007 and 2008, he had a combined almost $800,000 in his accounts. By May 2010, he was down to less than $200. In the fall of 2009, Dennis sent over another $100,000 to his favorite son. That money turned into about $60,000 by late April 2010. On May 28, 2010, that amount was down to $1,672 in his trading account. By the time his parents were dead, Eric had 3 bank accounts at Community Credit Union totaling $1,342. He had to hold up a family of 4 on that amount. The ups on his portfolio's trend line were apparently his father's infusions of cash. The downs were of his own bad trades. A friend would later say that Eric was a guy who took big risks, but didn't really consider him a gambler. But it wasn't just his investment accounts that were getting steamrolled. He was being squeezed by debts, a mortgage, credit cards, interest and principal on cash advances, and a $50,000 line of credit. He was in such a bad financial position that in the fall of 2009, he had borrowed $3,000 against his truck at 150% interest. 150. Then he pissed off the IRS, and you don't piss off the IRS. The tax agency came after him for $40,000 by April 2010 and threatened to use his property as collateral if Uncle Sam didn't get his share. He had no retirement accounts, no real income or savings. He could have sold his assets, which included his paid-off truck and other recreational vehicles, but that would blow the secret. Because no one knew. Not his father, not his mother, and certainly not his wife, who was a stay-at-home mom because he didn't want her to work. Eric's ambition was to be the rich sole breadwinner of the family, and at the end, it was just that, an ambition, nothing more. The bombshell came in the form of that blank check that was missing from the home that investigators tracked down on June 25th. On May 22nd, one day after the murders, Eric rolled up to the First Community Credit Union in West Salem and presented a check that was purported to be written and signed by Dennis from his Fidelity investment account. It was dated May 21st with the amount of $50,000 scrawled on it. Before it was deposited, Eric had $729 in his account. Forensic experts examined the check and determined it was a forgery. After the deposit, he moved roughly $32,000 of that money into his options account. As of June 30th, he only had about $22,000 left in that account. An analysis of his 3 bank accounts on May 31st, 2010 revealed that before the infusion of the $50,000, Eric had a checking account with $544. A significant loss from the $4,568 he had a year prior, and a saving account with $558, a drop from $3,961 over the same period. When asked in late July about the check, Eric said his dad signed it but left it blank and handed it to him the day before he was murdered. He said it was money from the account from which Dennis had already given him the $100,000 in the fall of 2009, and it was meant to help him with his day trading business. When asked why he didn't initially mention the check, Eric said he didn't think it was important to the investigation. The circumstances were enough for the prosecutor's office to file first-degree murder charges against Eric. He pled not guilty, so they went to trial. The state argued that Eric killed his parents simply because they were done giving him money, though it's not clear when they told him enough's enough. Unfortunately, they had no idea how desperate Eric was, the prosecution said. He was addicted to day trading. He refused to get a job, refused to have his wife get a job, or trade less, the state said. Eric had been adamant that Dennis had intended for him to get the $50,000 from the account that held the money from the car dealership sale, but the prosecution said there was no evidence of that. In fact, the prosecution said Eric made multiple deliberate attempts to throw investigators off his trail, the most significant alleged lies being the gold coins and the fixed you letter, which he admitted in court he made up out of stress because he wanted investigators to stop pestering him and his family. The prosecution also raised the fact that Stephen Burgess received at least one additional death threat after the homicides. The condensed version of the defense's argument went something like this: no forensic DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints, no fiber evidence, no shell casings, no murder weapon, no witnesses, and no grout. Recall that earlier that day, Mike and Eric had been working on that tiling project and they hadn't fully cleaned themselves of the sandy mixture. Well, the defense argued that forensics didn't pick up any grout at the crime scene. The defense also argued that the timelines didn't add up. They don't believe Eric would have made it to the Cola residence to do the hit from the tiling job, in part because they were pushing the defense that he was actually at the first Shopko. Here's the breakdown. The accepted time that Eric leaves the tiling job is around 5:20. It takes about 14 to 16 minutes to travel from there to his parents' place, sooner if above the speed limit. He has to kill Myrna immediately at 5:41 p.m. and then wait for his father to get home at around 6 p.m. to kill him. He has a receipt from the second Shopko planting him there at 6:15 p.m. The distance between the two Shopkos is about a 10-minute drive. Therefore, he could not have committed it if he's at the first Shopko, let alone if he's actually browsing that store. So the defense focused a lot of time discussing the first Shopko's surveillance system and its faults, including the fact that it was known to have blind spots. The defense also brought a witness who said Dennis was into owning and selling gold, and that multiple witnesses said they didn't hear Dennis speak ill about Eric, but that they heard him rage against his daughter's husband, Patrick. The court also heard the hitman defense, that the scene was too clean and that it was highly unlikely that it was done by a guy who had just learned, perhaps the day before, that Dennis was cutting him off financially. After 12 years of working together with the father-son bond they've created, what are the chances that Dennis just abruptly slams a door on Eric all at once, they argued. They also claimed that there were 11 cigarette butts found in the area of the Kohler residence, but none were submitted for testing. Recall that the suspicious guy at the restaurant was a smoker. As for Eric's financial trouble, the defense argued that he got swept up during the financial crisis, which was not uncommon for traders. They also argued that he had been up to speed on his debts, having prepaid some of his mortgage and credit card bills immediately before the murders. Eric also had access to $40,000 from his mother-in-law after the death of her husband. Where's the desperation? The defense repeated. Of course, that doesn't really address the very little liquid cash he had left in his bank accounts to feed his family. And with respect to the forgery, the defense said Eric had permission to sign Dennis's checks, as he had done so many times when he was looking after his parents' home when they were on vacation and when he was working at the dealership. The jury wasn't swayed by the defense, and it didn't help that Eric lied a lot during his time he was under the microscope. Eric was found guilty of the 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of forgery. Frankly, I think the jury got it right, the judge said during the sentencing hearing. I think the jury rejected the notion of the hitman, that they did not find that to be convincing. I think the idea that this skilled professional hitman would somehow venture into the wrong house and kill the wrong people really stretched the imagination. I note that Mr. Burgess continued receiving the last call at least after the homicide and before the bodies of your parents were discovered. There was an extremely strong motive, financial in nature. It was clear that you were in extremely poor financial condition. All that could be said was that you had enough bills, enough resources to pay the bills through the end of the month. There was no apparent source of income beyond that. The day trading appeared to be a losing proposition. Your parents led an extremely low-risk lifestyle. They had few enemies, no other person with an apparent motive to commit these crimes. The idea that your father somehow was obligated to or felt an obligation to make up to you the losses that you may have incurred because of the bankruptcy of another business, frankly, stretched the imagination. He had no reason to do that. He was in no way responsible for that bankruptcy. You had the means, access to the type of weapon that was used. Obviously, it was not established that either was the particular weapon. That's open to dispute, but certainly you had access to the type of weapon that was used. You had the opportunity. The video from Shopko, while it allowed the opportunity for you to claim that you couldn't have been seen, certainly it was highly probable that if you had been at the Shopko, that you would have been captured on that video, as would your truck. You were not captured, your truck was not captured, and I think it's highly probable that you were not there, giving you the opportunity to commit this crime. No other person had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. That in and of itself may not establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but certainly establish to a high degree of probability. And then the jury had to consider you, your demeanor, your credibility, and they began with what was apparent, that you had lied throughout the investigation, that you had looked the investigators straight in the eye, denied writing the check, denied writing the fixed due note. You sold that to the police when they arrived. You feigned fear. You feigned that you were so emotionally distraught, asking the police to accept the proposition that whoever had killed your parents was now focused on you and your family, knowing all the while that it was a lie, and you continued in that deception when you had contact with friends and family. And it would be very difficult for any juror after seeing that to accept that you had to say or give you any degree of credibility. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole for the murders and 6 years for forging the check. His appeals were denied. In February 2021, Christine and Eric Kola filed jointly to divorce. The delay may have been to see whether Eric could win on any of his appeals. Speaking of appeals, there is a cohort of people who are skeptical about Eric's involvement, including Eric himself.
I will not quit. Who is responsible for this is still out there. I'm not giving up. I'm going to fight and bring this person or people forward that did this, because I did not. I'm going to do this for my family. I pray that I will be able to go home and be with them someday.
He wrote letters thanking his supporters, including the creator of a Facebook page dedicated to the claim that he is innocent. In one of those letters, he wrote the following: "Hi everyone. Where to start? Where to start? That is the question. I would like to say that I am so thankful to all of you, my family and friends, and even the new friends for your support. It truly means the world to me to hear about all the people that are supporting and communicating on the website. I have to put out a special thank you to Lori for all that she has done with this site, amongst other things, and for helping me and my family to get the true facts out. Our hope is that someone along the way will come forward with information that will get the real killer. My mom and dad still remain my heroes and deserve the truth to be found. I would do anything to have them back with all of us, even to the extent that if it meant that I would have to be locked up for the crimes that I did not do. I miss them so much, more than words can express, and I think about them every single day. I am very saddened to have some family and friends actually think that I could have done this to dad and mom. I know that they simply need someone to blame. Well, guess what? So do I. However, I want the real person or persons caught, not just an easy scapegoat. Life in here sucks, and it is extremely draining on your mind and body, not to mention that it brings out the gray hair. I get an opportunity once in a while to talk to and see some friends and family, and let me tell you that it is wonderful. The letters back and forth help to cheer me up, and they are greatly appreciated. I am inviting anyone to send me a letter if you would like, even if we have not met. Feel free to ask any questions you would like, or simply to just say hi. Once again, thank you to everyone for your support and standing behind me. I know that Chris, Dexter, and Hadley, my family, also say thank you. I hope to hear from you. Please private message Lori for my address if you are looking to write. Bye for now, and thank you. Eric Kola." Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me narrate this story, which is based on the primary sources. Special mention must always go to the local reporters for shedding light on these cases, to the court clerks for assisting with case files, and to you guys for engaging in the subject matter. Be well, do a charitable act, smile at someone, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.